Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
I did have a lot of anxiety in my pregnancy because I just have a small baby. I am 5'4", my husband is 5'8". We are not tall people, we are not giants, we are not husky people, we are thin, petite people. That's just how it is. And I have a thin, petite baby who is even more petite because they are a girl. This particular nurse was kind of like, oh, that's cute that you want to have no interventions. That's really great. And I'm not trying to scare anybody out of a hospital birth. I'm just saying you need to have an ironclad birthing plan. They tried to say that I had gestational diabetes. Don't you know that in your third trimester of pregnancy, your blood sugar just tends to run high and how you respond to glucose changes? If you're clenching, that's not helpful for pushing out a human being. You actually have to relax in order to push. Being pregnant is the first challenge you have of protecting your child against the world. Long time no see. Welcome back to the FEMCAST. We are going to be talking about my birth story today. It has been a long time coming. In fact, if you do the math, it's been about 15 or 16 months coming. And I just didn't get around to doing it because I was busy living the life that I preach about, being a stay-at-home mom, being a homemaker, doing all of the things, trying to be of maximal service to my family. So that's why I just haven't been recording as much. But I figured it was time for me to get this done because I don't know how much time I have left before I get pregnant again. I lost most of my postpartum weight, and that was kind of my goal, was to reset a little bit so that I could get pregnant again in a healthy way. Not to say that you should avoid getting pregnant if you haven't lost all the weight. It's just I'm an athletic person, and so I have certain physical standards that I like to meet, and I came close to meeting that standard, and hopefully I'll be adding another little bundle of joy sometime soon. We shall see. So if you like this content, make sure you give it a big thumbs up, subscribe down below, and hit the notification bell. My birth story is a little bit traumatic, but all births are traumatic. I'm not sure how traumatic this particular one is. So trigger warning, I guess. The way that I went into labor was very cozy and comfy. I was hanging out in my kitchen and I was actually writing a Substack article at my island, and my back started to hurt and it wouldn't go away. And I kept thinking to myself, man, this is super uncomfortable. And then I stopped being able to talk and I had to close my eyes and focus. And my doula warned me about this. So I thought, well, maybe I'm in labor. We'll see. It turns out that I was correct. And I actually ended up being in labor for 5 days. No, I'm not kidding. It was really 5 days long, but it was worth it. And I'll explain how that happened a little bit later. First, I want to talk about my experience being pregnant in the first place because I did not like my OBGYN. So during the scamdemic, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with C-19. Medicine in America became a very untrustworthy institution, and that made me very wary of having a hospital birth in the first place. However, that was my husband's preference, and I do listen to my husband because he only wants the best for me. It was my husband's preference that I give birth in a hospital in case something should go wrong, and it ended up being the right decision in the end, but at the beginning I was very hesitant. We kind of argued about it. You know, I wanted a home birth. He was saying, well, it's for the things that you can't think of that you might want to have a hospital birth. All in all, I said, okay, I trust you. This is what I'm willing to do. And we pursued having a hospitalized birth, which means that I did see a traditional OBGYN, but I would have seen a traditional OBGYN to begin with because that's how you can keep your insurance coverage of the pregnancy. You don't want to be a non-compliant patient. So somewhere in the middle of my pregnancy is when we switched to being all in on a hospital birth. And I didn't like my OB from the get-go because they were trying to recommend to me the jab, the C-19 jab, which if any of you are familiar, it actually is harmful for pregnant women, for babies in the womb, for the unborn. It's harmful for women's reproductive cycle. The data has come out now, but back in the day that would have made you a conspiracy theorist, but it didn't matter. My OB was recommending that I get this. And further along in my pregnancy, we had a lot of disagreements. There were things that he wanted me to get done that I didn't want to consent to. And if it was really important, I would discuss it with my husband because my husband has a medical background. So I would run things by him. I would say, this is what they're asking me to do. I don't want to do it. And he would say, okay, it makes sense that you don't want to do that. That's fine. And then other times he would confront me and say, no, they want to do this because of X. And if you don't get this done, it could miss these big threats to maybe you or the baby. And that's why I think you should get that procedure done. And then I would go ahead and I would do whatever it was that he and my doctor decided was best for me, because I do trust my husband that much. And we make well-informed decisions when it comes to our medical care, because we are both very skeptical of doctors to begin with. What made me uncomfortable was that I knew I was going to go past my due date anyway. Most of the time in your first pregnancy, you go past your due date. So you go past 40 weeks. These doctors really start to freak out about the whole 40-week thing, even though if it's your first baby, you're probably going to deliver around 41 weeks, and that's right on time, and that's totally fine. They don't care. It just increases the relative risk of a negative outcome. It does not increase the absolute risk. There is a difference. So when I say like a relative risk over an overall risk, I'm saying that some things you can be twice at risk for, right? That's what the doctors like to tell you. Well, if you don't get this procedure done as a pregnant woman, you will be 2 times as likely to insert whatever negative outcome. That isn't helpful, because what if it's a 1 in 1,000 chance, right? So you're telling me that I'm going to be twice as likely. So it's going to be a 2 in 1,000 chance for me if I don't agree with whatever the intervention is. If those are my odds, I'm going to go ahead and refuse the intervention. That's just me though. So that's how doctors like to scare people in terms of absolute risk versus relative risk. A lot of OBs cannot even tell you what the absolute risk is about whatever you're being confronted with and discussing and disagreeing with them over what you should or should not do as a pregnant woman. I did have a lot of anxiety in my pregnancy because somewhere around my 20-week anatomy scan, my baby was measuring small, and you would think that this is something to be super concerned about given what they were telling me. And then I had to go and get additional testing and more testing. And then at some point in the more testing, they tried to say I had a chance of having some kind of chromosomal defect with my baby. My baby has 10 fingers, 10 toes, totally healthy, totally competent, meeting all the milestones. So I got all of that testing done, and all it did was put me in further stress. I found out that I'm a carrier for a fatal disease. Very frustrating, but in terms of measuring small in the womb, don't you guys know that I just have a micro mini baby? I just have a small baby. I am 5'4". My husband is 5'8". We are not tall people. We are not giants. We are not husky people. We are thin, petite people. That's just how it is. And I have a thin, petite baby who is even more petite because they are a girl. So all that stress and all that fuss, in my opinion, turned out to be for nothing. It is helpful to know that I am a carrier for a fatal disease. That's helpful. That way I can communicate to my future children, hey, you also might be a carrier for this fatal disease. My husband, fortunately, is not a carrier, so it doesn't change anything for the two of us, which that's amazing. Glory be to God on that one. But yes, back to getting closer to 40 weeks. As soon as I start getting close to 38 weeks, they talk about like induction a little bit, just to prepare your mind, I guess. And then the 40-week mark comes by, and then the doctor's very, very pushy about inducing. And almost every single one of my appointments is pushing me into anxiety, because all I want is to go into labor as natural as possible, because the more interventions you get, the higher risk you have for complications. It's like they're correlated. I'm not going to say like correlation equals causation, but I am saying there is a correlation there. So if I'm going to trust my body and try to minimize risk as much as possible, I'm going to try to go as natural as possible. So past the 40-week mark, my doctor starts talking to me more about inductions. And what I thought was interesting is in one instance, he would say, oh yeah, we should get induced on Friday. And then he would change his mind and say, oh, well, we can get induced on Monday. And I'm thinking in my head, if this is so important for me to get induced, wouldn't it be as soon as possible? Why are you pushing it back? Does that mean that you are actually able to push it back? I actually ended up getting stress testing done past the 40-week mark to just monitor the baby. And I was fine doing that, and it made sense to do. But I'm talking about like I was literally in labor while I was getting stress testing done, in early prodromal labor. So it's not as intense contractions. They're like mini, very comfy, very cozy, very demure contractions. And I was getting stress testing done while I was experiencing those. So we were getting along the way when it came to labor, but we're going to pause really quick on that. We're going to go back during the pregnancy and the annoying things they made me do. They tried to say that I had gestational diabetes. Don't you know that in your third trimester of pregnancy, your blood sugar just tends to run high, and how you respond to glucose changes? It's more of a time, if you are predisposed to gestational diabetes, to cut back on sweets, to cut back on sugary coffees. Also, what I ended up doing instead was I went and I started pricking my finger and doing my own blood glucose testing and keeping a journal and monitoring it 1 hour after eating, 2 hours after eating. After having slept all night, I would just monitor my blood glucose, and me and my husband would share the figures back and forth, and he would say, this is good, this is not good. And I ended up figuring out what was making my blood sugar spike. But they had me drink this nasty orange drink, which I am so confused. If you're going to test someone for gestational diabetes, why would you make them drink 75 grams of glucose straight to the dome? Why? That sounds like a good way to end up with a high blood sugar on your testing. So that added further complications to all of the annoying monitoring of the Western ethno-medicine model. No, thank you. It's terrible. Moving on to my stress testing. Toward the end, I'm past my 40-week mark. I'm in labor. I'm still getting stress testing done while I'm in labor, fighting tooth and nail with my OB. Guys, it got so bad that there was a point where my OB just stopped talking to me and would only talk to my husband. But you know what? I don't care, because guess what? Being pregnant is the first challenge you have of protecting your child against the world. So more power to me. Mama bear instincts activated. I am proud of myself. And I did pretty dang good when it came to delivery anyway. There was actually a medical reason why I ended up getting induced anyway. My water was broken for a long time. I tried to tell my OB that I felt like I was leaking, that something seemed different about the fluid down there, and they ignored me. While I'm getting the testing done, we're getting these final ultrasounds, and the final ultrasounds are showing that it's getting a little bit tight quarters in there because the amniotic fluid is low. But I ended up doing some research, and I ended up looking up low amniotic fluid and evidence-based birth. I'll link that in the description down below for you guys so that you can make informed decisions. There are 2 metrics to measure low amniotic fluid. One metric I did not pass. It was 4 quadrants. For those of you that are unfamiliar, when you are pregnant, your womb is divided into quadrants. That's right. So in terms of all 4 quadrants having a satisfactory amount of fluid, no, it wasn't satisfactory. But the other metric I did meet, and it's the single deepest pocket. Looking at the single deepest pocket of a quadrant of the womb, I had enough amniotic fluid for now. And the baby was compensating pretty good. Wasn't too big of a deal. I go to my final ultrasound and I go in. My OB doesn't even talk to me. He says, your husband around? He calls my husband. Because he just knew at this point not to talk to me unless if it's not legit and there is no strong medical indication for the intervention you are recommending to me. Do not talk to me. I already don't trust you. You tried to get me jabbed. You tried to get me jabbed while I was pregnant. Why would I trust you? So inevitably, my baby was not given a passing score. They didn't have enough amniotic fluid, and I kind of knew immediately that we were going to go to the hospital to get induced. My husband and I, we get in the car, we head to the hospital. I know this is coming. I foolishly thought that I could handle Pitocin without getting an epidural. I did end up getting an epidural. But the way that I was administered my Pitocin was some straight up shenanigans. I don't want to make this a super epic complaint session, but it was shenanigans. The nurse I had was tattooed with bad hygiene, was a travel nurse, meaning she wasn't organic to the unit. And, you know, sometimes you just don't get the best one when it comes to that. She wasn't organic to the unit. She's pushing the Pitocin and she's pushing it hard. My husband is by my side. At some point I start asking for my mom because my mom actually was able to time her travel correctly with me being in labor. Very fortunate for us that that happened in the first place because it could not have gone that way. She could have came to visit and I could have not gone in labor at all. So my husband and my mom switch off, and then it gets a little bit later, and then I miss my husband a little bit more, so I try to get him to come see me. And I am going through it with the Pitocin. Most of my labor pattern was a transition labor, which is really tough, but that was what I was dealing with for most of the time. And I made it to 4 centimeters dilated before I ended up getting the epidural as well. But by the time I was getting the epidural, I was close to vomiting. I had a hard time standing. And some of this stuff is normal and some of it is not. I was genuinely praying and hoping to just pass out. I didn't even care how the baby was going to come out of me anymore. At that point, I was hoping that I would pass out and I would wake up and I would have a baby in my arms. However the hell that happened, I was cool with it. I don't even think that I would have cared if it was a C-section at that point because my mind was just not there. I did have a doula, and somewhere in between my contractions, I'm like saying some really crazy stuff to her. about how I feel terrible and this is all awful and I don't know what to do. And I'm like moaning. I have my laptop with me. I'm listening to lo-fi. It was hell. And the reason why it was hell in that moment is because I was alone with my nasty, smelly, tattooed travel nurse. I was alone with her. She's pushing this medication super hard. And I look at her and I say, do you think you can stop the medication? She says, I don't think the doctor would like that. And I'm basically trying to communicate to her, like, can you ask the doctor? She just walks out of the room. Do you know that she could have paused the Pitocin drip, continued monitoring me, and they could have gotten the anesthesiologist to come in and give me an epidural and then resumed the Pitocin? They could have. They didn't. She's a terrible human being. She did not have to increase my dose like so quickly. For what? I don't even think they care about what you are trying to accomplish and like your peace of mind, because I went in there saying I didn't want any interventions, and it was almost like they were wishing for my downfall, like kind of scoffing at me, or this particular nurse was. The nurses I had during delivery and after delivery were phenomenal, but this particular nurse was kind of like, oh, that's cute that you want to have no interventions. That's really great. You know, not what you want to convey to a birthing woman. Pretty terrible, if you ask me. And I'm not trying to scare anybody out of a hospital birth. I'm just saying you need to have an ironclad birthing plan, and not just a birthing plan because that's more of a preference list, because God could say, you're going to give birth another way. Thank you for preparing, but it's not going to happen. But you at least want to know the interventions you want to accept or what you want to decline, and you want to know why, and you want to know what your breaking point is. When will you take whatever the intervention is? And you want to make sure that you know about it, your doula knows about it. I would definitely hire a doula if you have a hospital birth. My doula was my biggest advocate, because my husband couldn't be my biggest advocate because he has never given birth and he didn't really understand what was consent in that context of being in labor. He's not a woman, so he wouldn't have got it, but she'd been to enough births, and so there were a lot of moments in time where she was like, hey, do you want this? And I would say yes, or I would say no. And she'd be like, she doesn't want that, or she does want that. And I just felt so at peace. Like, I trusted her so much. I'm so grateful for her. She's such a good person. I'm still in contact with her to this day. Plan on having the next baby with her by my side as well. So my husband ends up coming to get me. Well, not get me. He ends up joining me in the delivery room. And I'm like writhing and I'm aching and I'm drooling and I'm having a hard time standing. Part of that's normal. All births are traumatic. Yeah. And then we end up getting the epidural. And I think it actually ended up being good that I got the epidural, because I was in so much pain and I was tensing up. What you have to understand about Pitocin is that it's artificial oxytocin. When you are going into labor without Pitocin, with your natural oxytocin, you produce endorphins in your brain to compensate for the pain. If you are getting Pitocin, you're not able to neurologically compensate for that pain in the way that God intended for a birthing woman to be able to do. I had a reason to get induced. It was the right choice because my baby did not have enough amniotic fluid and it was getting sketchy. It was getting dicey. I understand that. But it turned out to be a good thing that I got the epidural, because with all that tension, because I was already uncomfortable, I'm in a hospital. Everything that I didn't want to happen is happening. I feel like nobody's listening to me. Nobody's advocating for me besides my doula. So I just felt so alone and annoyed, and that was making me tense up a lot. And that's not good for birth. If you're clenching, that's not helpful for pushing out a human being. You actually have to relax in order to push. After the epidural happens, within an hour or two, I go from 4 centimeters dilated all the way to like 8 or 9 centimeters dilated. I finally start pushing somewhere in the morning, and I was out of it by then. I had not slept in 24 hours. My doula told me to sleep when I was in early labor. I didn't believe her. I didn't listen to her. I loved being in early labor though. It was so much fun. I played Fortnite. I baked cookies. I took a bath. I got my hair shampooed. It was such a good time before I went to the hospital. And then I went to the hospital and it was terrible. So after I end up pushing my baby out, which that was very easy for me to do, and I credit that to being an incredibly fit individual beforehand. With an epidural, you cannot feel yourself from the waist down. And when I say the waist down, I mean your mid-back down, because you have to think about where your dermatomes follow, so where your nerves follow from your back. So I would say where your belly button is, but it's even higher than that. You can't feel your entire stomach, your entire abdominal muscles from what most of you would think is the waist down. So if I had not been able to engage my core in the past, if I didn't have a strong core in the past, I don't know that I could have been able to push out my baby in a timely fashion. I was able to push for 15 to 30 minutes. And then my baby was earthside, and that was very strange. And I didn't know what to think because the person was inside of me. Now they're outside of me. Who are you? Who are you? What do we do now? What is life now? So after I give birth, I am out of it. I'm in a haze. I'm confused. I had a reasonable amount of blood loss. Nothing important enough for me to have to get any blood replaced, but I was just out of it. You're crashing from adrenaline. You've had adrenaline high for a while of being in labor. I'm confused. I can't talk. I'm gray. I'm pallorous. I can't even take care of my baby. I actually ended up sending my baby to the nursery because I was so out of it. It's like, what am I supposed to do? I can't keep this person alive right now because I don't even know how to say words right now. I don't even know what to do. We did get contact during the golden hour. We did start nursing during the golden hour. All of the things, but I was not present, you know? So then 12 hours later, we reunite, we start hanging out, but then I have this new problem because I got an epidural and I've been drinking some water and I've been getting in fluids, but I also had a catheter. This is pretty standard stuff for women who get an epidural. You have to be able to put your urine somewhere. Sorry to get so graphic with you guys, but this is important to talk about medical advocacy because the nonsense just doesn't stop. So I ended up getting the catheter removed, I think because they thought that the epidural would wear off and I would be able to use the bathroom. But that was not the case. And my bladder was getting more and more full. And your bladder actually can explode if it gets too full. But I didn't want them to put another catheter in me. They thought about doing it. I was like, no, because at this point I am so tired of being touched by these people. I had that Pitocin pushed so hard. I'm tired of being touched by these people. I don't like doctors. I don't want them putting something else in my urethra. Absolutely not. Get out of here. Get away from me. So I ended up getting the nurses to kind of figure something else out. We get peppermint oil and a sitz bath. So basically the peppermint oil, you put it on your wrist or your hand and you smell it while you're, sitting over warm flowing water. And that should kind of trick your brain into peeing. And it did work, and everything was good, and everything was gravy after that. But I'm just saying, the level of stress that I was under, I genuinely think I had low-key some PTSD from labor. And it wasn't from the labor itself. It was just from the medical establishment and my experience with them. Because I had a very pleasant experience with my baby. My baby's awesome. But I'm telling you, it was so bad that I had to ask for like an anti-anxiety medication. Granted, some of this is from the hormone change of having been pregnant and then not being pregnant anymore and then starting lactation. You're just going through it. I thought I was a sane woman before I had a baby, and then I got pregnant and I was like, well, maybe I'm a little bit off. And then I was postpartum and then I was like, maybe I'm way off. And then I thought, maybe women should just never be president. But, I know that's going to anger some of you, but I really believe that. There is just absolutely no way. These hormones were crazy. So now we can go into the fun part where we wanted to leave the hospital early. They wanted to keep us there for arbitrary reasons. And in my head, I'm like, I hate the medical establishment. I just want to go home. They had really good food though. Not gonna lie, that was my favorite part, was the delivery food. Yes. I still think about that food to this day. That hospital has the best food in town. But we wanted to leave. They were trying to keep us for arbitrary reasons because my water was broken for a long time and allegedly that exposes the baby to risk of infection. I get that. My husband ends up asking the pediatrician and the OBs on staff, what are the algorithms that you're using to come to the decision that we should stay here for a longer amount of days? Because in our minds, this comes down to profit in a sense. But if it's legit, we will stay. So he finds out the algorithm. He starts calculating it himself. He starts asking me questions. How far along were you? When did you start labor? How much does the baby weigh? And he puts in that data, and the information that comes out of it basically was there's no really strong clinical indication that we should stay here, or that we have to stay here. So then my husband had to fight the longhouse. So he had to fight all these bitter 40-year-old women who have never been told no in their life that work at the hospital. We're leaving against medical advice. And they made that really hard. They were super annoyed with us for wanting to do this, but you don't have to stay in a hospital, just so you guys know. If you want to leave, you can leave. They tried to make us do a bunch of crazy stuff after, right? They brought us 12 parenting DVDs that we allegedly had to watch before we left so that we could be good parents. These DVDs are not meant for intelligent parents, in my humble opinion. These are meant for parents that genuinely, if you did not give them a step-by-step, play-by-play on how to keep a baby alive, they wouldn't be able to do it because they are that dumb. That was the impression that I got. My husband's like, we are not watching these DVDs. Great. We're going to the car. What do we need to do to get her to the car? I have to be wheeled to the car, which makes sense. I did have a baby, and I believe I'm supposed to be holding the baby while I'm wheeled to the car. We end up finally getting in the car and we end up going home. And everything was super cool after that. It was chill vibes. But the work to get there, to just advocate for myself, to not be taken advantage of by the medical system, it was a lot, y'all. And you know, the next time around, I'm going to have a hospital birth again. I'm still going to have a doula. Again, my doula was my biggest supporter. Shout out to her. She's amazing. I'm going to have a doula, and I do want to have another baby, and I'll do a hospital birth because you never know what could go wrong. But I want to say, women, if you're watching and you don't have any medical complications with your pregnancy and you want to have a natural birth, you're going to a hospital, understand that these people are not used to seeing natural birth. So you have to be strong, you have to be steadfast, and you have to stick by your principles. And you have to make sure you have people around you to advocate for you while you're in labor, because once you're in labor, you just can't advocate for yourself. You will be too overcome with the labor process to say, this is what I would like done, this is what I decline. And it's really sad that you have to go to a hospital with this kind of mindset when you want to go into labor, but that's how it is today. They are trained to find what's going wrong in a labor and not what is going right, which means that they're going to find more things wrong. But in the big picture, is it actually wrong, or is it just a unique experience that's happening to a single woman and there's low absolute risk for a negative outcome? So that's my advice to you young ladies, and know that you can leave the hospital early. You want to make sure that it's a wise decision to do. For example, if my baby had an indication that they had some sort of infection, we would have stayed. We absolutely would have stayed because we're always flexible on that kind of thing. We want to make sure that we have a good reason to leave against medical advice, because the last thing you want is to go home, your baby has an infection, and you made a foolish decision and now you don't have a baby anymore. That would be terrible, right? And make sure you have a lot of support postpartum. I'm actually going to do another video about my postpartum experience because I actually did not get along with my husband postpartum, and I thought that I was this terrible alien who was going through something unique that no other woman had ever gone through before. However, it's very common, and your brain does change once you become a mom. You get a whole new brain, and it's not the same brain that you had when you were pregnant. Believe me on that. There's data and information on that. So it just changes who you are. It changes how you communicate. It changes how you relate to your husband. You guys have different instincts. The instincts, they do clash. You're thinking more about safety of a tiny human being, and he's not seeing the same threats to the human being as you because they just don't have the same ideas. They know how to do very physical protection, but sometimes it takes a while for men to get used to how to handle a baby, you know, even something as simple as making sure you support their neck because they come out kind of loose. They can't support their own neck. But we did overcome that, and we are looking forward to our next pregnancy. And I'd like to talk about that because a lot of women find themselves in that position and they think, oh my gosh, did I pick the wrong guy? Is it over? Am I an idiot? What did I do wrong? And really, maybe what you need to do is just wait. Give your husband some time to adapt to being a husband and a father. And you might come out on the other side A-okay and trying for a new one. But yes, that is my birth story. It was 100% worth it. I love my baby. I do not regret being a mom. I don't regret being a stay-at-home mom. I've been a stay-at-home mom for about 1.5 years at this point. It has been worth every single minute. And everything that people tell you you can't do because you have a baby, it's a lie. There's a lot of things that you can do with a baby, especially if you only have one. You can go anywhere, whenever, wherever. If you are a stay-at-home mom or work from home with a flexible schedule, you have so much freedom as a stay-at-home mom. So all this lying that people do about how you are going to be trapped in a house, you're going to feel trapped. Don't get me wrong. You're going to be physically incapacitated for a while postpartum, but you're going to be able to walk again. You're going to heal, whether you had a vaginal delivery or a C-section. You will overcome. And as for the weight loss, every woman's journey is different. I don't think that I could have lost the amount of weight that I did in the time frame that I did if I was a working mom or if I was a single mom. I'm going to say that right now. My husband's been very supportive. He will watch our baby while I work out for 2 to 3 hours, and he's never griped about it either. It's probably because I come home in a better mood, but you need support. is what I'm getting at. To have the experience of motherhood that you are desiring, you need support. So if there are things that you need to do in order to get that, if you need to move toward your in-laws, if you need to move toward your organic family, do it while you can. You can do it if you're not pregnant, but if you have to do it while you're pregnant, get it done before that baby comes, because once you're postpartum, you are where you are. And if you lack support, you lack it. And that was really hard for us because where we are at geographically, we could only rely on one another. And that was just tough. It's a lot of pressure for a marriage in general, for anyone's marriage. Imagine two of you have to keep one human being alive and they're waking up every 2 hours. It's tough. You don't think it's tough, but you'll see. I was sleep deprived in the military, and it was just not the same as being sleep deprived as a mother to newborn. I will tell you that genuinely I was having some hallucinations at times just from being so exhausted. I'm not convinced that women should be driving. I'm sorry. Not to get all right wing about it, but is there a way that we can get some public transportation for new moms? Is that possible? Can we get the Biden administration to do something about that? Probably not. Can we get the Trump administration to do something about that? We shouldn't be driving sleep-deprived babies. No, that's so dangerous. It's my opinion. You guys can get mad if you want. I'm sorry. But yes, if you want to have a baby, don't be afraid. With pregnancy, the only way out is through, and it will 100% be worth it on the other side. And whether your pregnancy is a challenge, traumatic, or not, whether your labor is a challenge or is traumatic or not, there are a lot of points of redemption that you can have after the fact. I didn't have the childbirth experience that I wanted. It's almost kind of like who does, really. But some women do. I know women who had a phenomenal time having a natural labor, a home birth, or birth at a birthing center, and they're so proud of it. And I don't want to degrade what those women have done. You guys have accomplished something beautiful and wonderful, going through all of that without a single intervention. Like, hats off to you. Very challenging to do. But you can have those points of redemption, meaning, but while I didn't have the childbirth experience that I wanted, I had the breastfeeding experience that I wanted. And it was such a precious moment in time. And I loved every second of it. The first 6 weeks were hard, but I'll talk about that in another video. So if you did have a childbirth experience and it sucked, you can still make your motherhood experience anew, and you can still regain your autonomy elsewhere. So I hope you like my birth story. On our way out, I want to tell you guys about some tallow soap, which is super low in toxins. Actually, there are no toxins in it. There's only 4 ingredients in most of this. If you get the scent-free one, there's only 3, I believe. There is grass-fed beef tallow, organic olive oil, organic coconut, organic lavender and patchouli essential oils for this particular scent, because this is lavender and patchouli, but they have scent-free ones that you can use on babies. I don't know if you knew that. You can use tallow soap on your baby and they'll be absolutely fine so long as it's scent-free. Check these guys out at healthesoulsoap.com. The owner is a Zoomer husband and father. He has a newborn, and your money is going to go to a family that's being supported by a small business. On top of that, the owner views you as a neighbor because the owner is Christian. So he doesn't look at you as a customer. He looks at you as a neighbor. And that is part of his ministry, is making soap and creating a family and trying to inspire other young men to pursue excellence as well. So I would give them a shot. You can use code Aly10 at checkout for 10% off. That's all I have for you guys. I will do a breastfeeding testimonial soon. See you next time. Bye.